The cold winds of March 1876 cut through Cassidy Norton's woolen cloak as she stared at the endless road ahead, wondering if her decision to leave Boston had been the gravest mistake of her 22 years. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously in Tucson 3 days ago, but Wickenburg, her true destination in the Arizona Territory, still lay nearly 100 miles north. She had managed to secure passage with a merchant wagon train headed that way, the last leg of a journey that had already tested her resolve in ways she never imagined. "Miss Norton will be crossing the Hassayampa River before sundown," announced Mr. Holloway, the aging merchant whose wagon she shared. "Weather's turning. Best get yourself ready for a wet crossing." Cassidy nodded, adjusting her bonnet against the increasing wind. The merchant's warning proved prophetic as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the spring storms Arizona was known for. The small caravan of 4 wagons pressed forward as raindrops began to pelt the canvas coverings. "We should make camp," suggested Mrs. Holloway, the merchant's wife. "That river gets dangerous when it rains." "Nonsense, Martha," replied Mr. Holloway. "We're less than a day from Wickenburg. I won't lose another day of trading." The rain intensified as they approached the riverbank, the normally placid Hassayampa swollen with recent rains. Cassidy's stomach tightened with anxiety as she watched the lead wagon enter the churning waters. "Mr. Holloway, perhaps your wife is right," Cassidy ventured, but her words were lost in a crack of thunder. The lead wagon made it safely across, followed by the second. As the Holloway's wagon entered the water, Cassidy gripped the wooden seat, her knuckles white. The wagon lurched forward, water rising around the wheels. "We're too heavy," Mrs. Holloway cried, clutching her husband's arm. They were halfway across when Cassidy felt the wagon tilt. A sickening crack pierced the air, louder even than the thunder overhead. "The axle," Mr. Holloway shouted. It snapped. The wagon listed dangerously to one side. Water rushed in, soaking Cassidy's skirts. The current pushed against the damaged vehicle, threatening to overturn it completely. "Jump!" Mrs. Holloway screamed, already flinging herself toward the far shore. Cassidy froze, terror paralyzing her limbs as she watched the elderly couple struggle toward the bank. The current was stronger than it appeared, pushing them downstream despite their efforts. Suddenly, there was movement on the shore. A rider appeared, dismounting in one fluid motion before plunging into the raging waters. Cassidy could only watch as a tall man in a rain-soaked duster fought the current, reaching the Holloways and helping them to safety. The wagon groaned beneath her, shifting in the riverbed. Cassidy tried to stand, but her sodden skirts weighed her down. The man was coming back, pushing through the current with determined strokes. "Take my hand," he called, reaching the wagon and extending his arm toward her. Cassidy reached out, their fingers connecting just as the wagon shifted again. She tumbled forward into the cold water, a scream torn from her throat as the current instantly seized her. Strong arms encircled her waist, pulling her against a solid chest. She couldn't see through the rain and water in her eyes, could only feel the powerful strokes as the stranger fought to keep them both afloat. "I've got you," a deep voice assured her. "Just hold on." The journey to shore seemed endless, but finally, Cassidy felt solid ground beneath them. The man didn't release her, instead lifting her fully into his arms and carrying her the remaining distance up the bank. "You're safe," he whispered against her hair, his breath warm against her cold skin. "You're safe now." Only then did Cassidy look up into the face of her rescuer. Rain streamed down sharp features, plastering dark hair to his forehead, but his eyes startlingly blue against his tanned skin held her gaze with an intensity that stole what little breath remained in her lungs. "Thank you," she managed to say through chattering teeth. Drew O'Malley, he introduced himself, setting her gently on her feet once they reached the others. And you'd be the schoolteacher they've been expecting in Wickenburg, I reckon. Cassidy nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Cassidy Norton, how did you know? A smile touched his lips, transforming his rugged face. Not many young ladies travel alone to these parts unless they're coming to teach or to marry, and since you're not wearing a ring. His eyes dropped briefly to her bare left hand. Mr. Holloway approached them, his face grim. Miss Norton's trunk is still in the wagon along with our supplies. Everything will be ruined. Drew O'Malley nodded, already removing his duster. I'll see what I can salvage. The rain's letting up and there's a homestead not far from here where we can seek shelter. The Jensen place. Asked one of the other merchants. That's right. Old Carl won't mind putting us up for the night. As Drew waded back into the river to retrieve what he could from the damaged wagon, Cassidy couldn't help but stare after him. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to hardship, unbothered by the cold water or the task ahead. Lucky he was passing by, Mrs. Holloway said, coming to stand beside Cassidy. Drew O'Malley runs cattle north of Wickenburg. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but always willing to lend a hand. Does he always ride in thunderstorms? Cassidy asked, accepting a blanket from one of the other travelers. Mrs. Holloway smiled knowingly. Only when he's bringing supplies to old widows like me who have run short between deliveries. We weren't expected on this route. Drew was headed to my sister's place when he spotted our wagon train. The implications of the woman's words weren't lost on Cassidy. Their rescuer had risked his life for strangers when he had no obligation to do so. Drew returned with a waterlogged trunk and several bags. This is the best I could do, he announced, dropping the items on the bank. The wagon's not salvageable. Current's already broken it apart. Mr. Holloway sighed heavily. All my goods lost. You've got your lives, Drew replied firmly. And insurance, I hope. As the group gathered what remained of their belongings, Drew approached Cassidy again. Your trunk took on water, Miss Norton. Most of your things will need drying out. Cassidy nodded, resigned. I appreciate your efforts, Mr. O'Malley. Drew, he corrected, those blue eyes capturing hers again. Folks around here use first names. Then I'm Cassidy, she replied, surprised by the small thrill that ran through her at the informality. Drew's horse approached, nudging his shoulder. This is Thunder, he introduced, patting the magnificent black stallion's neck. He'll carry you to the Jensen place. It's about 3 miles from here. I can walk, Cassidy protested. In those wet skirts, you'd catch your death before we made it a mile. Without waiting for further argument, Drew lifted her onto his horse. The others will follow in the remaining wagons. To Cassidy's surprise, Drew didn't mount behind her but instead took Thunder's reins and began leading them on foot. You're walking? She asked incredulously. These boots were made for it, he replied with a slight smile. Besides, Thunder's carried me all day. He deserves a lighter burden. As they set off toward the promise of shelter, Cassidy found herself studying her rescuer's profile. Drew O'Malley walked with the loose-limbed grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, seemingly unbothered by his soaked clothing or the mud clinging to his boots. How long have you been in Arizona territory? She asked, breaking the silence between them. 8 years, he replied. Came west after the war with nothing but thunder and the clothes on my back. The war, Cassidy echoed, calculating quickly. You seem too young to have fought. A shadow crossed his face. I was 16 when I enlisted, lied about my age. By 18, I'd seen enough death to last a lifetime. Cassidy fell silent, sensing she'd touched on painful memories. I'm sorry, she finally said. Drew shook his head. Don't be, it's long past. He glanced up at her. "What brings a Boston lady to Wickenburg? Your accent gives you away." "Is it that obvious?" Cassidy smiled ruefully. "I came to teach at the new school. There aren't many opportunities for unmarried women in Boston, especially those without substantial fortunes or connections. Teaching children in a mining town seems an unusual choice." "Perhaps," she agreed, "but I wanted adventure, to make my own way." She hesitated, then added, "My parents passed away last year. There was nothing keeping me in Boston except memories." Drew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Wickenburg's growing fast. Lots of families settling in now that the Apache raids have stopped. Those children need education. And you? What do you do besides rescuing damsels from raging rivers?" His laugh was unexpected and warm. "My ranch is about 10 miles north of town. Nothing fancy, but the cattle are healthy and the land's paid for." They crested a small rise, and Cassidy caught sight of a modest homestead nestled in a stand of cottonwoods. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcome sight against the darkening sky. "The Jensen place," Drew announced. "Carl's wife passed 2 winters ago, but he's still the best cook this side of the Hassayampa." As they approached, an elderly man emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a flour-dusted apron. "Drew O'Malley, what brings you out in this weather, and with a lady no less?" "Wagon accident at the river crossing, Carl," Drew called. "Got some folks needing shelter for the night." Carl Jensen hurried down the steps, his weathered face creasing with concern. "How many?" "7, including Miss Norton here." Carl looked up at Cassidy with kind eyes. "Well, miss, you're welcome here. Come inside and get dry. Stew's almost ready." Drew helped Cassidy dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks as their eyes met briefly before he turned to lead Thunder to the barn. Inside the Jensen home, Cassidy found herself wrapped in a quilt before a roaring fire, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. Carl bustled about, pulling extra bedding from a chest and adding more potatoes to a bubbling pot of stew. "Drew's a good man," Carl said conversationally as he worked. "Saved my life once when my horse threw me miles from home, carried me back just like he carried you from that river." "He seems very capable," Cassidy replied, sipping her coffee. Carl chuckled. "That's putting it mildly. Built his ranch from nothing. Works harder than men twice his size." He glanced toward the door. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you, though." Before Cassidy could respond, the door opened to admit Drew and the Holloways, followed shortly by the rest of their party. The small cabin quickly filled with voices, and the scent of wet wool as everyone settled in to wait out the storm. Throughout the evening meal, Cassidy found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Drew. He sat quietly, contributing to the conversation only when directly addressed, yet his presence filled the room. Several times she caught him watching her, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. As the evening wore on, sleeping arrangements were made. The women would take the bedroom, while the men would sleep in the main room. Cassidy helped Mrs. Holloway and the other woman settle in, then stepped outside onto the small porch, needing a moment of solitude after the day's events. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky scattered with stars and air washed clean of dust. Cassidy breathed deeply, letting the peace of the night settle around her. "Couldn't sleep?" Drew's voice came softly from the shadows. Cassidy turned to find him leaning against a post, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. "Too much excitement today, I suppose." He moved to stand beside her at the porch railing. "You handled yourself well. Most city women would have been hysterical after what you went through." "I've never found hysteria particularly useful," Cassidy replied with a small smile. Drew chuckled. "Fair point." He was silent for a moment before asking, "Are you having second thoughts about coming west?" The question surprised her. "No," she answered honestly. "Though I admit, this wasn't exactly the arrival I'd imagined. The West has a way of testing newcomers," Drew said. "Separates those who belong from those who don't." "And which am I?" Cassidy asked, turning to face him fully. In the silvery moonlight, his eyes seemed to hold the darkness of the sky above them. "I think you might just belong, Cassidy Norton." The way he said her name, soft yet somehow definitive, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with her damp clothing. For a breathless moment, she thought he might reach for her, but instead Drew straightened and stepped back. "Dawn comes early," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. "I'll ride into Wickenburg tomorrow and send back wagons for everyone. You should get some rest." With that, he disappeared back into the cabin, leaving Cassidy alone with the stars and the strange, unexpected fluttering in her chest. Morning arrived with clear skies and the promise of a warm day. Cassidy emerged from the bedroom to find Drew already gone, true to his word about an early start. Disappointment flickered through her before she could suppress it. Drew said he'd be back by midday with transportation, Carl informed her as he passed her a plate of biscuits and bacon. "Your trunk's on the porch. Thought you might want to see what could be salvaged." Cassidy thanked him and, after breakfast, turned her attention to her belongings. As she feared, most of her books were ruined, the pages swollen and stuck together despite her careful packing. Her clothing had fared better, though everything would need washing to remove the river silt. She was carefully laying out items to dry when the sound of approaching wagons drew her attention. Drew had returned, leading 2 farm wagons and several riders. "Town sent out a welcome party when they heard what happened," he announced, jumping down from Thunder. "Mayor Wilson himself came along." A portly gentleman in a dusty suit dismounted from one of the wagons, approaching Cassidy with an outstretched hand. "Miss Norton, I presume?" "Albert Wilson, Mayor of Wickenburg. We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." "Thank you, Mr. Mayor," Cassidy replied, shaking his hand. "I apologize for the delay." "Nonsense. Drew here told us about your ordeal. Simply remarkable that you're all safe." He turned to address the entire group. "We've brought wagons to transport everyone to town. The Holloways can stay at the boarding house until arrangements can be made for new merchandise." As the travelers gathered their belongings and loaded the wagons, Cassidy found herself once again in Drew's company as he helped her carry her trunk. "Will you be returning to your ranch now?" she asked, attempting to sound merely conversational. "Not right away," he replied. "Need to pick up supplies in town first. Winter was harder than usual this year." They loaded her trunk onto the second wagon, and Drew surprised her by offering his hand to help her up. "I'll ride alongside if you don't mind the company." "Not at all," Cassidy replied, perhaps too quickly. The journey to Wickenburg took several hours, during which Drew pointed out landmarks and told her about the town she would now call home. Founded in the early 1860s, Wickenburg had survived Apache attacks, mining booms and busts, and was now settling into a stable community supported by both mining and cattle ranching. "The school's on the north edge of town," Drew explained. "New building, finished just last month. Town's proud of it." "And where will I be staying?" Cassidy asked, realizing she hadn't thought to ask the mayor about her accommodations. "Mrs. Peterson runs a boarding house for respectable ladies. School board arranged a room for you there." Drew glanced at her. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and Mrs. Peterson sets a good table." As they approached Wickenburg, Cassidy took in her first view of the town with mixed emotions. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings formed the center, with smaller structures scattered outward. It was larger than she'd expected. yet still small enough that she suspected everyone knew everyone else's business. The wagons rolled down Main Street, attracting attention from townsfolk who emerged from shops and saloons to watch their arrival. Cassidy straightened her posture, aware of the curious stares directed her way. "That's Mrs. Peterson's place," Drew said, nodding toward a two-story white house set back from the street, "and the school's just beyond those trees." The mayor directed the wagons to stop in front of the boarding house, where a stern-looking woman in a pristine apron awaited them. "Mrs. Peterson, may I present Miss Cassidy Norton, our new school teacher," Mayor Wilson announced with flourish. The older woman's assessment was swift and thorough before she nodded. "Welcome to Wickenburg, Miss Norton. Your room is prepared, though I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "There was an accident at the river crossing," the mayor explained. "If not for Drew here, we might be planning a funeral instead of a welcome." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened slightly. "Well then, we're all grateful to Mr. O'Malley. Come inside, Miss Norton. You must be exhausted." Drew helped unload Cassidy's trunk, carrying it up to the small but neat room on the second floor that would be her new home. The room contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a small writing desk, and a wardrobe. "It's perfect," Cassidy said, genuinely pleased with the accommodations after her journey. Drew set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "School board's meeting tomorrow evening. They'll want to meet you, discuss when classes can begin." "So soon?" Cassidy asked, surprised. "Folks here are eager. Many of these children have never had proper schooling." He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Will you be at church on Sunday? Most of the town attends." Cassidy nodded. "Of course. It will be a good opportunity to meet the families." "Good," Drew replied, an unfamiliar awkwardness in his manner. "I should get my supplies and head back to the ranch. Cattle won't feed themselves." "Mr. O'Malley," Cassidy called as he reached the door. "Drew, thank you again for everything." He looked back at her, something warming in his blue eyes. "You're welcome, Miss Norton." "Cassidy." With a slight tip of his hat, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Mrs. Peterson appeared moments later with fresh linens and a pitcher of hot water. "Mr. O'Malley seemed in a hurry to leave," she remarked, her tone carefully neutral. "He has ranch responsibilities," Cassidy replied, busying herself with unpacking. "Indeed, not a man for town life, our Drew." Mrs. Peterson arranged the linens on the bed. "Dinner's at 6 sharp. You'll meet the other boarders, then just 2 at present, both seamstresses at the dress shop." Left alone, Cassidy moved to the window, which offered a view of Main Street. She caught sight of Drew emerging from the general store, loading supplies onto Thunder's back. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, meeting her eyes across the distance. He touched his hat in a silent salute before mounting and riding north out of town. Cassidy watched until he disappeared from view, wondering why the departure of a man she barely knew left her feeling so oddly bereft. The following days passed in a whirlwind of introductions and preparations. The school board, composed of the town's leading citizens, welcomed Cassidy warmly and set the opening of school for the following Monday. She spent hours arranging the classroom, reviewing the meager supply of textbooks, and creating lessons appropriate for the wide range of ages and abilities she would be teaching. Sunday arrived clear and warm. Cassidy dressed with special care in one of her few undamaged dresses, a blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes. As she walked to the small white church alongside Mrs. Peterson and the other boarders, she found herself scanning the gathering crowd for a particular tall figure. "Looking for someone?" asked Emma, one of the seamstress boarders, with a knowing smile. "Just taking in the town," Cassidy replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. The church filled quickly, families settling into pews with children scrubbed clean for the occasion. Cassidy found herself the object of curious stares and whispered comments as Mrs. Peterson led her to a seat near the front. Just as the service was about to begin, the door opened to admit one final worshiper. Cassidy didn't need to turn to know it was Drew. The sudden straightening of several young women in the congregation told her everything. He slipped into a pew at the back, but his height made him visible even from Cassidy's position. He wore a clean black suit that transformed him from rugged cowboy to respectable gentleman, though his sun-darkened skin and the lean strength evident even in repose marked him as a man who worked outdoors. Throughout the service, Cassidy found her attention wandering to the back of the church. Once, she caught Drew watching her, his expression unreadable before he quickly returned his attention to the minister. After the final hymn, the congregation spilled outside into the churchyard for the customary socializing. Cassidy found herself surrounded by parents eager to introduce their children and ask about her teaching methods. Miss Norton believes in a progressive approach to education, Mayor Wilson announced to anyone who would listen. Harvard-trained, you know. Wellesley College, actually, Cassidy corrected gently. Even better, the mayor exclaimed. A women's college for our female teacher, most appropriate. Cassidy smiled politely, though she wanted to point out that her education was every bit as rigorous as Harvard's. As she conversed with the townsfolk, she kept watching for Drew, but he seemed to have disappeared. "Looking for Drew O'Malley?" asked a female voice at her elbow. Cassidy turned to find a striking woman in an expensive-looking green dress watching her with sharp eyes. "I wanted to thank him again for his assistance during my journey," Cassidy replied cautiously. The woman smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Victoria Harrington. My father owns the largest mine in the territory." She offered her hand, adorned with several glittering rings. Drew never stays after service, probably already halfway back to that lonely ranch of his. There was something in Victoria's tone that suggested proprietary knowledge, and Cassidy felt an unexpected twinge of jealousy. "You know Mr. O'Malley well," Victoria's smile widened. "Everyone knows everyone in Wickenburg, Miss Norton. But yes, Drew and I have history." She glanced toward where her father was conversing with the mayor. "Daddy always hoped we'd marry, join the two largest properties in the county. Drew had other ideas." Before Cassidy could respond to this revelation, Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side. "Miss Norton, the minister wishes to discuss the Sunday school program with you." Grateful for the interruption, Cassidy excused herself from Victoria's company. The rest of the day passed pleasantly enough, though she found herself dwelling on Victoria's words and the implication that Drew had rejected a match with one of the wealthiest women in the territory. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for the opening of school. Cassidy arrived early, arranging slates and primers on the desks. By 8 o'clock, 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age had filed into the classroom, their expressions varying from excitement to sullen resignation. "Good morning," Cassidy greeted them warmly. "I am Miss Norton, and I'm delighted to be your teacher." The morning proceeded smoothly as Cassidy assessed the children's varying levels of education. Some of the older boys clearly resented being in school when they could be working, but most students showed genuine enthusiasm for learning. At midday, as the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Cassidy noticed a rider approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized Drew's distinctive figure atop Thunder. "Mr. O'Malley," she called, walking to meet him. "What brings you to town on a Monday?" Drew dismounted, leading Thunder by the reins. "Thought I'd see how the first day of school was progressing." He nodded toward the children. "Quite a turnout." Yes, more than expected, Cassidy smiled, though I'm still missing several children from outlying homesteads. Travel's difficult for some families, Drew agreed, especially those north of the river. An idea formed in Cassidy's mind. Perhaps I could arrange classes on alternating days, or visit the more distant homes myself on weekends. Drew looked at her with newfound respect. Most teachers wouldn't consider such accommodations. Education should be available to all children, not just those fortunate enough to live in town, Cassidy replied firmly. A small smile played at the corners of Drew's mouth. I have a feeling you're going to change things around here, Miss Norton. The afternoon bell rang, calling the children back to class. I should go, Cassidy said reluctantly. Drew nodded. I brought something for your classroom. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a package wrapped in brown paper. Ordered it from back east last month. Thought it might be useful. Cassidy unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully bound atlas of the United States. Mr. O'Malley, this is magnificent, she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. Drew, he reminded her softly, and it's nothing. Just thought the children should know there's a world beyond Wickenburg. Impulsively, Cassidy reached out to touch his arm. It's not nothing. It's thoughtful and generous. Thank you. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Cassidy forgot they were standing in the schoolyard with curious children watching. Something shifted in Drew's gaze, a warmth that made her breath catch. The moment was broken by a small voice calling, Miss Norton. Billy's eating worms again, Cassidy couldn't help laughing. Duty calls. Drew's smile reached his eyes this time. Go teach, Miss Norton. I'll see you again soon. As Cassidy returned to her classroom, Atlas clutched to her chest. She felt a lightness in her step that had nothing to do with the beautiful spring day. The following weeks established a routine for Cassidy. Weekdays were devoted to her growing number of students, while evenings were spent preparing lessons and grading assignments. Sundays brought church services, where her gaze inevitably sought out Drew, though their interactions remained limited to brief exchanges in the churchyard. Victoria Harrington made a point of speaking to Cassidy after each service, her conversation always managing to include casual mentions of Drew and their shared history. Cassidy tried to dismiss the woman's obvious attempts to stake her claim, but couldn't help wondering about the nature of Drew's past relationship with the mine owner's daughter. One Wednesday afternoon in late April, as Cassidy was dismissing her students for the day, she was surprised to see Drew waiting outside the schoolhouse. You have plans for the afternoon? He asked without preamble. Cassidy blinked at the unexpected question. Just grading arithmetic papers. Why? I thought you might like to see more of the territory. There's a place about an hour's ride from here that's worth visiting. The invitation was so unexpected that Cassidy momentarily fumbled for a response. That sounds lovely, but I don't have a horse. Drew's eyes crinkled at the corners. I brought an extra. Martha's gentle as a lamb belonged to Carl Jensen's wife before she passed. Cassidy glanced down at her practical but distinctly non-riding attire. I'm not dressed for riding. The skirt's full enough, Drew observed. And I promise to take the least dusty trails. Something in his expression, a mixture of hope and uncharacteristic uncertainty, made decision easy. Let me leave a note for Mrs. Peterson so she won't worry about my absence at dinner. 20 minutes later, Cassidy found herself atop a docile mare, following Drew along a narrow trail that wound through stands of mesquite and palo verde. The afternoon sun was warm but not uncomfortable, and the desert was alive with spring wildflowers. I never imagined the desert could be so beautiful, Cassidy admitted, taking in the riot of yellow and purple blooms carpeting the landscape. Drew glanced back at her. Most Easterners expect nothing but sand and rattlesnakes. The desert has secrets she only reveals to those who take the time to look. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Cassidy found herself studying Drew's straight back and broad shoulders as he rode ahead of her, noting the easy way he moved with his horse, as if they were extensions of each other. "We're almost there," Drew announced as the trail began to climb. "Just over this rise." As they crested the hill, Cassidy gasped. Before them lay a small valley, sheltered by rocky outcroppings and filled with cottonwood trees surrounding a clear pool fed by a spring. The late afternoon sun cast the scene in golden light, creating a vision so unexpected in the desert landscape that it seemed almost magical. "Oh, Drew," Cassidy breathed. "It's magnificent." "The Apache called it the place where shadows dance," Drew said, dismounting and helping Cassidy down from her horse. "It's been considered sacred ground for centuries." Cassidy followed him to the edge of the pool, where he spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag. "How did you find this place?" Drew's expression grew distant. "I was wounded during a cattle raid my first year here. Took a bullet in the shoulder when rustlers hit my small herd. I managed to get away, but I was losing blood, disoriented. Somehow thunder brought me here." He gestured to the spring. "The water saved my life." "That's remarkable," Cassidy said softly, touched that he would share such a personal story. "I've never brought anyone else here," Drew admitted, his voice low. "It's always been my private sanctuary." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Cassidy felt a flutter in her chest at the trust he was placing in her. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Drew reached into his saddlebag and produced a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I thought you might be hungry after teaching all day." The bundle contained cornbread, slices of cold roast beef, and 2 apples. "Did you cook this yourself?" Cassidy asked, accepting a portion gratefully. A slight flush colored Drew's cheekbones. "The beef and bread, yes. The apples came from the general store." "A man of many talents," Cassidy teased gently, biting into the surprisingly tender roast beef. "This is delicious." They ate in companionable silence, watching as the setting sun cast long shadows across the water. After they'd finished, Drew leaned back against a sun-warmed rock, stretching his long legs before him. "May I ask you something, Cassidy?" The use of her first name still sent a small thrill through her. "Of course. Why did you really come west?" "Teaching positions must be plentiful in Boston for someone with your education." Cassidy considered the question, aware that her answer mattered more than casual conversation would warrant. "After my parents died, I felt suffocated. Boston society has very specific expectations for unmarried women of a certain age. I was receiving offers of marriage from men my father's age who wanted a decorative, educated wife to manage their households. And that didn't appeal to you." There was no judgment in Drew's tone, only genuine curiosity. "I wanted more than to be someone's ornament," Cassidy replied. "I wanted purpose, adventure, to make a real difference in people's lives." She plucked a wildflower growing near the blanket. "When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Arizona Territory, it felt like Providence offering an escape." Drew nodded slowly. "And now that you're here, any regrets?" Cassidy met his gaze directly. "Not one." Something shifted in Drew's eyes, a decision made. He moved closer on the blanket, his hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Cassidy," he said softly, her name almost a question. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Yes." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. His lips were warm against hers, slightly chapped from the desert wind. Cassidy had been kissed before, awkward pecks from eager suitors at Boston socials, but never like this. Never with this sense of rightness, as if something long missing had finally been found. Drew pulled back first, his eyes searching hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I carried you from the river," he admitted, his voice husky. "I'm glad you finally did," Cassidy whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. His smile was slow and sweet, transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. He leaned in again, this time with more confidence, his arms encircling her waist as he drew her closer. The kiss deepened, sending warmth spiraling through Cassidy's body. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "We should head back," Drew said reluctantly, glancing at the darkening sky. "I promised to have you back by nightfall." The ride back to Wickenburg was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As the lights of town came into view, Drew reached over to touch Cassidy's hand where it rested on her reins. "May I call on you properly?" Sunday after church, Cassidy smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her. "I'd like that very much." He escorted her to Mrs. Peterson's door, remaining properly on his horse as propriety dictated. "Good night, Cassidy Norton." "Good night, Drew O'Malley," she replied, reluctant to end their time together but aware of curious eyes watching from neighboring houses. As she prepared for bed that night, Cassidy found herself humming softly, replaying the afternoon in her mind. She had come west seeking purpose and adventure, never expecting to find someone who made her feel both anchored and free at the same time. True to his word, Drew appeared at church on Sunday in his best suit, hair neatly combed and boots polished to a shine. The congregation took immediate notice when he sat beside Cassidy, rather than in his usual spot at the back. And the whispers that circulated during the service had nothing to do with the minister's sermon on charity. Victoria Harrington's sharp gaze burned into Cassidy's back throughout the service, but for once, Cassidy found she didn't care about the other woman's obvious disapproval. After church, Drew formally asked Mrs. Peterson's permission to take Cassidy for a Sunday drive, a request the boarding house keeper granted with poorly concealed delight. "Just have her back by supper time, Mr. O'Malley." Drew had borrowed a buggy for the occasion, and as they drove through town, Cassidy was acutely aware of the statement they were making. In a small community like Wickenburg, being seen together in such a formal courtship setting was tantamount to a declaration of serious intentions. "Everyone is watching us," Cassidy murmured, nodding toward a group of women who had stopped their conversation to stare openly as the buggy passed. Drew's lips quirked. "Good. Saves me the trouble of taking out an advertisement in the Wickenburg Gazette." "An advertisement?" Cassidy laughed. "Stating what exactly?" His expression grew serious. "That Drew O'Malley has finally found something worth more than all the gold in the territory." Cassidy's breath caught at the simple declaration. Before she could respond, a voice called out from the boardwalk. "Drew, hold up a minute." The mayor hurried toward them, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Glad I caught you. There's trouble brewing north of town. Harrington's men have diverted water from the creek that runs through your property. Several ranchers are up in arms about it." Drew's expression darkened. "He can't do that. Water rights are clearly established in this county. Tell that to Harrington. He claims the new mining operation needs the water, and he's got the governor's ear." Mayor Wilson glanced apologetically at Cassidy. "Sorry to interrupt your Sunday, but there's a meeting at the county office tomorrow morning. We need you there." "I'll be there," Drew assured him, his jaw tight with anger. As the mayor walked away, Cassidy placed a gentle hand on Drew's arm. "This sounds serious. Harrington's been trying to force small ranchers out for years," Drew explained, flicking the reins to set the buggy in motion again. He wants to consolidate the entire valley under his control, first for mining, eventually for a cattle empire for his daughter to inherit. Victoria, Cassidy asked, recalling the beautiful woman's proprietary attitude toward Drew. Drew nodded grimly. Harrington pushed hard for a match between us, offered to make me foreman of his entire operation if I'd marry her. When I refused, he took it personally. You never mentioned this before, Cassidy said carefully. It wasn't relevant until now. Drew glanced at her. But with Harrington seeing us together, it might become so. He's not a man who likes to lose, and he'd consider you choosing a poor rancher over his daughter's wealthy father a personal insult. Cassidy straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of Mr. Harrington or his daughter. Drew's expression softened as he looked at her. No, I don't suppose you are. Just one more reason I'm falling in love with you, Cassidy Norton. The declaration, so casually made, left Cassidy momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged as little more than a whisper. Falling in love with me. Drew guided the buggy onto a side trail that led to a scenic overlook above the town. Once they reached it, he set the brake and turned to face her fully. I think I started falling the moment you looked up at me with those green eyes, soaking wet and still worrying about the Holloways rather than yourself. He took her gloved hands in his. I know it's soon. Too soon by Boston standards, I imagine. But out here, life moves differently. Time feels more precious somehow. Drew, Cassidy began, her heart pounding. You don't have to say anything, he assured her quickly. I don't expect I'm falling in love with you too, she interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. I think I have been since you whispered you're safe, and I believed it with my whole heart. The smile that spread across Drew's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, then kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Drew kept hold of her hands. I'm not a wealthy man, Cassidy. My ranch is modest, and ranching is always at the mercy of weather and markets. But everything I have is honestly earned, and I can promise you'll never want for anything essential. I don't need wealth, Cassidy assured him. I need a partner, someone who sees me as an equal, not a possession or an ornament. You'll always be my equal, Drew promised. Though I can't guarantee, I won't want to protect you now and then. Cassidy laughed softly. I can accept that, as long as you understand I might occasionally need to rescue you as well. Their second kiss sealed the understanding between them, a promise of partnership that transcended the traditional roles they'd both rejected in their own ways. The following weeks brought both joy and challenges. Drew called on Cassidy regularly, their courtship becoming the talk of Wickenburg. Most townspeople approved, seeing the match as fitting the respected teacher and the honorable rancher were well suited in temperament and character. The Harringtons, however, made their disapproval abundantly clear. Victoria snubbed Cassidy at every opportunity, while her father's mining operation continued to encroach on water rights throughout the valley, creating hardship for many small ranchers, including Drew. The creek's down to a trickle, Drew reported grimly one evening as he and Cassidy walked along the edge of town. If we don't get rain soon, I'll lose half my herd. Can't the territorial courts intervene? Cassidy asked. Drew shook his head. Harrington's lawyers have tied everything up in legal proceedings that could take months to resolve. By then, it'll be too late for this season's calves. Cassidy squeezed his hand supportively. There must be something that can be done. Some of the ranchers are talking about direct action, Drew admitted reluctantly. Destroying the diversion dam Harrington built, alarm flickered through Cassidy. That would be dangerous, possibly illegal. I know. I've been counseling patients, but tempers are running hot. He looked down at her, his expression troubled. "I don't want you worried about this. It's my problem to solve." "Your problems are my problems now," Cassidy reminded him firmly. "We're in this together, remember." The warmth that filled Drew's eyes chased away some of the worry lines around them. "What did I do to deserve you, Cassidy Norton?" "You carried me across a river," she replied with a small smile, "and promised I was safe. I'm just returning the favor." May gave way to June, bringing scorching temperatures but no rain. The water dispute intensified as wells began to run dry and livestock suffered. Cassidy's school term ended for summer break, giving her more time to help Drew and other affected families. She organized a community meeting at the schoolhouse, inviting representatives from both ranching and mining interests to discuss solutions. To everyone's surprise, Theodore Harrington himself attended, arriving in an expensive carriage with Victoria at his side. "Miss Norton," Harrington greeted her coldly, "I understand you've taken it upon yourself to mediate our little disagreement." Cassidy met his gaze steadily. "Water is everyone's concern, Mr. Harrington. I merely provided a neutral location for discussion." "How charitable," Victoria commented, her smile razor-sharp. "Though one wonders if your interest is truly in the community or merely in protecting your friend's property." "My interest is in finding a solution that benefits everyone," Cassidy replied evenly. "Including your mining operations, Miss Harrington." The meeting began tensely but gradually progressed toward productive discussion. Cassidy suggested a rotating water schedule that would ensure both mines and ranches received adequate supply during the drought. To her surprise, Harrington seemed to consider the proposal seriously. "It's not ideal," he conceded, "but it could work temporarily until the autumn rains." As the meeting dispersed, Harrington approached Cassidy privately. "You're an impressive young woman, Miss Norton. Educated, articulate, clearly capable of managing difficult men." His gaze flicked toward Drew, who was speaking with other ranchers across the room. "It's a shame to see such talents wasted." "I don't consider teaching children or supporting my community a waste, Mr. Harrington," Cassidy replied. "Of course not." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "But surely you had greater ambitions than becoming a rancher's wife in a dusty frontier town." Before Cassidy could respond, Harrington continued, his voice lowered. "My offer to O'Malley still stands. With his knowledge of cattle and my resources, we could build something remarkable. You could be part of it, too, the schoolmistress for the entire Harrington enterprise. Proper housing, supplies, a real library." "That's very generous," Cassidy said carefully, "but I think you should discuss business propositions with Mr. O'Malley directly." "I've tried. The man's stubborn pride gets in the way of his good sense." Harrington's expression hardened. "Pride doesn't feed cattle during a drought, Miss Norton. Remember that." With that parting comment, he collected Victoria and departed, leaving Cassidy troubled by what felt distinctly like a threat. That evening, as Drew walked her back to the boarding house, Cassidy shared Harrington's comments. "I'm worried, Drew." There was something in his tone that suggested he's not finished causing trouble. Drew's expression was grim but unsurprised. "Harrington doesn't like losing, and he considers you choosing me over his offer a personal defeat." "It wasn't a competition," Cassidy protested. "To men like Harrington, everything is," Drew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I should ride out to check the northern boundary tonight, make sure the agreement is being honored." Cassidy frowned. "Now it's almost dark. Better to catch any problems early." He kissed her forehead reassuringly. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." Despite his assurances, Cassidy slept poorly that night, troubled by vague dreams of rushing water and distant gunshots. She awoke at dawn, an inexplicable sense of dread settling in her stomach. By mid-morning, when Drew had not appeared in town as promised, Cassidy's concern deepened. She was preparing to ask the livery stable owner about borrowing a horse when Mayor Wilson burst into the boarding house, his face ashen. "Miss Norton, thank God you're here." "There's been trouble at the North Creek." Cassidy's heart seemed to stop. "Drew, he's alive," the mayor assured her quickly, "but hurt. Harrington's men caught him inspecting the diversion dam. Words were exchanged, then fists. O'Malley took a bad fall down the embankment." "Where is he now?" Cassidy was already reaching for her shawl. "At his ranch. Some of the other ranchers found him this morning and brought him home. Doctor's with him now." "I need to go to him," Cassidy insisted. The mayor nodded. "I figured as much. Got a wagon waiting outside." The journey to Drew's ranch seemed interminable, though it took less than an hour. Cassidy had visited only once before, for a properly chaperoned Sunday dinner shortly after they began courting. The modest but well-maintained ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, a plume of smoke rising from the chimney despite the summer heat. Dr. Morgan emerged from the house as their wagon approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. His expression was grave but not dire. "How is he?" Cassidy asked, not waiting for the wagon to fully stop before jumping down. "Concussion, 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder I've managed to set," the doctor replied. "He's in pain but not in danger, provided infection doesn't set in." "Can I see him?" Dr. Morgan nodded. "He's been asking for you. Try to keep him calm. He's in no condition to be getting riled up about Harrington." Inside, the ranch house was cool and surprisingly comfortable, furnished with simple but well-crafted pieces. Cassidy followed the doctor's directions to the bedroom, where she found Drew propped up on pillows, his torso wrapped in bandages and his face bruised on one side. "Cassidy," he said, his voice rough but his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. "You shouldn't have come all this way." "Did you honestly think I wouldn't?" she replied, moving swiftly to his bedside and taking his uninjured hand in hers. "Hoped you would," he admitted with a weak smile. "Though Mrs. Peterson will probably revoke my calling privileges for compromising your reputation. Let me worry about Mrs. Peterson." Cassidy studied his injuries with growing anger. "Drew, what happened?" "The mayor said Harrington's men were involved." Drew's expression darkened. "They weren't just diverting water, they were poisoning it, adding mining waste upstream from where it rejoins the main creek. I confronted the foreman about it and things got heated." "Did they push you?" Cassidy asked, horrified. "Not directly, but they made sure I was standing at the edge of the embankment when they decided to rush me." His fingers tightened around hers. "This isn't just about water rights anymore, Cassidy. Harrington wants me gone one way or another." "We need to report this to the sheriff," Cassidy insisted. Drew's bitter laugh turned into a grimace of pain. "Sheriff Andrews, he's been in Harrington's pocket for years." "Then the territorial authorities take weeks to respond if they bother at all." Drew shook his head carefully. "No, this has to be handled locally." Cassidy's mind raced through options. The water meeting showed that reasonable people on both sides want a peaceful solution. "We need to build on that coalition." "You're not getting involved in this," Drew said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "I'm already involved," Cassidy countered, "and I'm not the one lying in bed with broken ribs." Something shifted in Drew's expression, a mixture of pride, love, and resignation. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Cassidy Norton. Fortunate for you under the circumstances." She leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Rest now. I'll be here when you wake up." "Promise," he murmured, fatigue and pain medication already pulling him toward sleep. "Promise," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "You're safe." Over the next 2 days, Cassidy established herself as Drew's caretaker with Dr. Morgan's blessing and Mayor Wilson's support. Mrs. Peterson sent over a trunk of Cassidy's belongings and a note expressing understanding of the exceptional circumstances. Word of Drew's injury and Harrington's involvement spread quickly through the community, galvanizing support from ranchers and townspeople alike. Many had tired of the mining magnate's heavy-handed tactics, but had lacked the courage to oppose him openly until now. On the third day, as Cassidy was preparing lunch in Drew's kitchen, hoofbeats announced a visitor. Through the window, she saw Victoria Harrington dismounting from an expensive mare. Cassidy dried her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. "Miss Harrington, this is unexpected." Victoria's elegant riding habit was spotless despite the dusty ride, her posture impeccable as she removed her gloves. "Miss Norton, I understand you've installed yourself as nurse to our injured rancher." "Mr. O'Malley needed care," Cassidy replied evenly. "I was in a position to provide it." Victoria's laugh was brittle. How convenient. Alone in his house, miles from town, quite the opportunity to secure his proposal, I imagine. Cassidy felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "If you've come to insult me, Miss Harrington, you've wasted a long ride. Actually, I've come with a message from my father." Victoria reached into her reticule and withdrew an envelope. "He's prepared to offer Mr. O'Malley a generous sum for his property, enough to start fresh elsewhere away from complications." Cassidy didn't take the envelope. "Drew isn't selling. Everyone has a price, Miss Norton." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched, "even principled cowboys." "Then your father will have to present his offer when Drew is recovered," Cassidy replied. "I have no authority to negotiate on his behalf." Victoria stepped closer, dropping all pretense of civility. "Listen carefully. What happened at the creek was a warning. Next time he won't walk away with just broken ribs. My father built this county from nothing, and he won't let some stubborn cowboy and his Boston schoolteacher stand in his way." "Is that a threat, Miss Harrington?" Cassidy asked quietly. "It's reality." Victoria turned to remount her horse. "You have 3 days to consider the offer. After that, my father will assume negotiations have failed." With a final cold glance, she added, "For both your sakes, don't be foolish. There's no future for you here." After Victoria departed, Cassidy stood motionless on the porch, the woman's words echoing in her mind. When she finally returned inside, she found Drew awake and struggling to sit up. "I heard voices," he said, wincing with the effort. "Who was here?" Cassidy helped him adjust his position before answering. "Victoria Harrington, with an offer from her father to buy your ranch." Drew's expression hardened. "Did she mention a price?" "No, just that it was generous." Cassidy hesitated. "She also implied that what happened at the creek was deliberate, and that worse would follow if you refused to sell." "Bastards," Drew muttered, then immediately apologized. "Sorry for the language. I've heard worse in Boston drawing rooms," Cassidy assured him with a small smile. "What are we going to do?" Drew's gaze softened at her use of we, and he reached for her hand. "First, I'm going to ask you something I've been meaning to ask since the day at the spring." Cassidy's heart quickened. "Drew, I had plans, you know, a proper courtship, a ring. Maybe even a new suit." He smiled ruefully, gesturing at his bandaged torso. "Not exactly how I pictured this moment." "Drew O'Malley, are you proposing to me while confined to bed with broken ribs?" Cassidy asked, trying and failing to keep the emotion from her voice. "I am," he confirmed, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Because life's too uncertain to wait for perfect moments. I love you, Cassidy Norton. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Cassidy's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will." The kiss they shared was gentle due to Drew's injuries, but filled with promise. When they parted, Drew's expression had transformed from pain to determined. "Now," he said, "we fight for our future." Over the next day, Cassidy and Drew formulated a plan. With Drew still unable to travel, Cassidy would return to town to rally community support and present evidence of Harrington's water contamination to Judge Wilson, the mayor's brother and the only judicial authority not openly aligned with the mining interests. "Are you sure about this?" Drew asked as Cassidy prepared to leave the following morning. "Harrington won't take this challenge lightly." "I'm sure about us," Cassidy replied, kissing him goodbye. "Everything else is just details." Mayor Wilson had arranged for 2 ranchers to escort Cassidy back to Wickenburg and remain at the ranch with Drew during her absence. The show of solidarity was heartening, evidence that the community was finally willing to stand against Harrington's intimidation. In town, Cassidy moved quickly, meeting with the mayor and judge to present water samples collected from above and below the diversion dam. The contamination was obvious even to untrained eyes, the downstream sample cloudy with mining waste. "This is criminal," Judge Wilson declared after examining the evidence. "Intentional poisoning of water sources carries severe penalties in the territory." "Will you issue an injunction against the mining operation?" Cassidy asked. The judge nodded grimly. "Immediately. And I'll telegraph the territorial marshal. This goes beyond local jurisdiction." News of the legal action spread rapidly. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the courthouse, evenly divided between mining employees loyal to Harrington and townspeople supporting the ranchers. As Cassidy emerged from a meeting with the judge, she found Victoria waiting for her on the courthouse steps. "You've made a serious mistake," Victoria hissed, her composure cracking. "My father won't stand for this public humiliation." "This isn't about humiliation, Miss Harrington," Cassidy replied steadily. "It's about justice and the law." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Law? My father makes the laws in this territory. By the time his lawyers are finished, your precious injunction won't be worth the paper it's written on." "Perhaps," Cassidy acknowledged, "but the territorial marshal might take a different view of attempted murder and water poisoning." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, the first hint of uncertainty Cassidy had seen there. "No one attempted murder. Accidents happen." "3 witnesses say otherwise," Cassidy countered. "Men willing to testify that your father's foreman deliberately caused Drew's fall after he discovered the contamination." Victoria's face paled slightly before she recovered her composure. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Cassidy held the other woman's gaze steadily. "Are you willing to risk your father's empire on that assumption?" Before Victoria could respond, a commotion at the end of the street drew their attention. A cloud of dust announced riders approaching at speed, at least a dozen men, with Theodore Harrington at their head. "It seems we're about to find out," Victoria said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Cassidy's heart raced as she watched Harrington and his men dismount outside the saloon. The mining magnate cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered despite his 60 years, with a shock of white hair and a meticulously groomed beard. He strode toward the courthouse with the confidence of a man unaccustomed to opposition. "Miss Norton," he called, climbing the steps to stand before her. "I understand you've been busy in my absence." "Mr. Harrington," Cassidy acknowledged coolly. "Judge Wilson has issued an injunction against your mining operation pending investigation of water contamination and other criminal matters." Harrington smiled, though the expression never reached his cold gray eyes. "Injunctions can be overturned, accusations refuted, witnesses persuaded to reconsider their statements." "Father," Victoria interrupted, moving to his side. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Harrington ignored his daughter, his attention fixed on Cassidy. "I offered O'Malley a fair price for his worthless ranch, more than fair. But he refused, and now you perpetuate his foolishness." "The ranch isn't for sale," Cassidy stated firmly. "Not at any price." "Everything has a price," Harrington growled, "and everyone has a breaking point. O'Malley will learn that lesson one way or another." Mayor Wilson emerged from the courthouse, accompanied by his brother the judge and several deputies. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Harrington," the mayor said, "made in front of witnesses, including judicial officers." Harrington's expression darkened. "You overstep, Wilson. I built this town. I can tear it down just as easily." "Not anymore," Judge Wilson declared, unfolding an official document. "I've received confirmation from the territorial governor. Your mining permits are suspended pending investigation of environmental violations." For a moment, shock registered on Harrington's face before fury replaced it. "This is absurd. The governor wouldn't dare." "He would and has," the judge interrupted. "Especially after receiving sworn testimony about your operation dumping arsenic compounds into a major watershed." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of onlookers. Arsenic poisoning was no abstract concern in mining communities. Everyone knew of cases where contaminated water had killed livestock and sickened families. Victoria grabbed her father's arm. "Father, please, let's discuss this rationally." For once, Harrington heeded his daughter, though his expression remained thunderous. "This isn't over," he warned, pointing at Cassidy. "Not by a long shot." As Harrington and Victoria retreated toward the saloon, followed by their men, Mayor Wilson turned to Cassidy with concern. "You should stay in town tonight. It's not safe to return to the ranch until the marshal arrives." Cassidy shook her head. "Drew is still vulnerable out there. I need to get back to him." "Then take reinforcements," the mayor insisted. "I'll send deputies with you." An hour later, Cassidy was riding toward Drew's ranch, accompanied by 3 armed deputies. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape as they approached the ranch house. Something felt wrong as they drew closer. There was no smoke from the chimney, no sign of the 2 ranchers who should have been standing guard. "Something's happened," Cassidy said urgently to the lead deputy. "Hurry!" They spurred their horses forward, reaching the ranch yard moments later. The front door stood open, and signs of a struggle were evident: overturned chairs on the porch, a broken window. "Drew!" Cassidy cried, leaping from her horse and rushing toward the house. Inside, she found one of the ranchers unconscious on the floor, a bloody gash on his temple. The other was nowhere to be seen. "Drew!" she called again, panic rising in her throat as she searched the empty bedroom. The lead deputy knelt beside the injured rancher who was beginning to stir. "What happened? Where's O'Malley?" "Harrington's men," the rancher mumbled, struggling to sit up. 6, maybe 7 of them, came for O'Malley, said Harrington wanted to negotiate personally. Cold fear gripped Cassidy's heart. "They took him." "Where?" "North. Said something about settling things at the dam." Cassidy turned to the deputies. "We have to go after them." "Drew's injured. He can't defend himself." "Miss Norton, we're outnumbered," the lead deputy protested. "We should wait for the marshal." "By then it will be too late," Cassidy insisted. "You heard what Harrington said in town. He means to make an example of Drew." The deputy hesitated, clearly torn between duty and caution. Finally, he nodded. "We'll go, but you stay here." "I'm coming with you," Cassidy stated, her tone brooking no argument. "Drew needs me." They rode hard toward the northern boundary of Drew's property, where the diverted creek and dam lay. Twilight was fading into darkness, making the terrain treacherous, but Cassidy urged her horse forward, fear for Drew overriding all other concerns. As they approached the creek, the sound of angry voices carried on the evening air. Through the gathering gloom, Cassidy could make out several figures near the dam, Harrington and his men, and a lone figure on his knees before them. "Drew, we need to get closer," Cassidy whispered to the deputies. "See what they're planning." They dismounted and crept forward on foot, using the brush as cover. As they drew nearer, Harrington's voice became distinct. "Last chance, O'Malley. Sign the deed transfer and you walk away. Refuse, and we'll find out if you can swim with broken ribs." Drew's response was too low to hear, but Harrington's angry reaction made it clear he hadn't agreed. "Have it your way," Harrington spat. "Break the dam. Let's see how he handles the flood." Horror surged through Cassidy as she realized their plan. The dam had created a significant reservoir behind it. Breaking it would release a torrent of water down the narrow creek bed with Drew directly in its path. Without thinking, she burst from cover. "Stop! The marshal is coming. The whole town knows what you're doing." All heads turned toward her, expressions ranging from shock to fury. "Cassidy, no!" Drew shouted, struggling to rise despite his injuries. "Get back!" Harrington recovered quickly, gesturing to his men. "Restrain her. She can join her cowboy in the creek." Two men moved toward Cassidy, but before they could reach her, gunshots rang out as the deputies emerged from hiding, weapons drawn. "That's far enough, Harrington," the lead deputy called. "Release O'Malley and step away from the dam." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Harrington smiled coldly. "4 deputies against 7 of my men. Poor odds, wouldn't you say? Make that 12 against 7, came a new voice from behind them. Cassidy turned to see Mayor Wilson leading a group of townsmen and ranchers into the clearing, all armed. Word travels fast in a small community, Harrington, especially when someone threatens one of our own. Harrington's expression shifted from confidence to calculation as he assessed the changing odds. Before he could respond, Victoria emerged from the shadows near the dam. "Father, it's over," she said quietly but firmly. "The territorial marshal is an hour behind them with warrants for your arrest." "Victoria, what are you saying?" Harrington demanded. "Whose side are you on?" "The side of reason," she replied. "You've gone too far. I won't watch you destroy everything you've built because of a vendetta." Fury contorted Harrington's features. "You betray me. For them," he gestured wildly toward Drew and Cassidy. "No, father, for you." Victoria's voice remained steady. "You taught me to protect our interests above all else." "This isn't protecting anything, it's throwing everything away over pride." While Harrington's attention was diverted, Cassidy moved swiftly to Drew's side, helping him to his feet. He leaned heavily against her, his breathing labored from pain and exertion. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured, though his eyes shone with love and pride. "Stubborn woman." "Someone had to save you," she whispered back. Harrington, seeing Drew and Cassidy together, made a sound of disgust. "Fine, take your worthless ranch and your school teacher. But don't think this is over. I still control the territorial legislature, the railroad commission." "Not anymore," Mayor Wilson interrupted. "The governor's special investigator has been reviewing your business practices for months. Tonight's events were just the final evidence they needed." The fight seemed to drain out of Harrington all at once, his shoulders sagging as the implications sank in. His men, sensing defeat, began to back away. "Father," Victoria said, taking his arm, "it's time to go home." As Harrington allowed his daughter to lead him away, the tension in the clearing gradually dissipated. The deputies moved to secure the dam, ensuring it wouldn't be tampered with again. Drew turned to Cassidy, his face pale with exhaustion but his eyes clear. "When I said I wanted an adventurous wife, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind." Cassidy laughed softly, relief making her light-headed. "You carried me across a river once. I'm just returning the favor." "I think we're even now," Drew said, wincing as he shifted his weight. "Though I might need you to carry me home tonight." Mayor Wilson approached them, concern evident in his expression. "O'Malley, you need a doctor. We'll get you back to town." "Thank you, Mayor," Drew replied. "But if it's all the same to you, I'd like to go home with my fiancée." The mayor's eyebrows rose. "Fiancée? Well, congratulations are in order, it seems." As word spread among the gathered men, a cheer went up, momentarily drowning out the sound of the creek flowing freely once more. That night, under the watchful eye of Dr. Morgan, who had been summoned to the ranch, Drew and Cassidy sat together on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the clear desert sky. "What do you think will happen to Harrington?" Cassidy asked, her hand entwined with Drew's. "He has powerful friends," Drew replied thoughtfully. "He won't face prison, but his days of running this county like a personal fiefdom are over." "And Victoria," Drew sighed. "She made the right choice in the end. That counts for something." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Cassidy spoke again. "I was so afraid when I found you gone." Drew squeezed her hand. "I knew you'd come for me. Just like I knew from the moment I carried you across that river that you were the one I'd been waiting for my whole life." Cassidy leaned her head against his shoulder, careful not to press against his injured ribs. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as I can stand without wincing," Drew replied with a small laugh. "Though Mrs. Peterson might insist on a proper wedding with all the trimmings." "I don't need trimmings," Cassidy said softly. "Just you." 3 weeks later, on a perfect July morning, Cassidy Norton stood beside Drew O'Malley in Wickenburg's white church, exchanging vows before the entire community. Drew, still moving carefully but healing well, looked handsome in a new suit ordered specially from Tucson. Cassidy wore a simple white dress that Emma and the other seamstress had worked day and night to complete. Mayor Wilson hosted the reception in the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of potluck contributions from every household. Even Victoria Harrington made a brief appearance, offering stilted congratulations before departing for the East, where her father had relocated after selling most of his Arizona holdings. As the celebration continued into the evening, Drew led Cassidy away from the crowd, toward where Thunder waited patiently beside a new mare. "Ready to go home, Mrs. O'Malley?" he asked, helping her mount. Cassidy smiled down at her husband, happiness filling her completely. "Lead the way, Mr. O'Malley." They rode north together as the setting sun painted the desert in hues of gold and crimson, toward the ranch that would be their home and the future they would build together. 5 years later, Cassidy sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Drew chased their 3-year-old daughter Sarah across the yard, the little girl's laughter ringing out in the clear morning air. Their 1-year-old son James slept peacefully in her arms, his dark hair so like his father's damp with the sweat of an Arizona summer. The ranch had prospered under their joint management. Drew's cattle operation had expanded, while Cassidy had established a small school for neighboring ranch children, allowing her to continue teaching while raising their family. Wickenburg had grown too, the railroad's arrival 2 years earlier bringing new opportunities and residents. Theodore Harrington's name was rarely mentioned anymore, though occasional letters from Victoria, now married to a Boston banker, kept them informed of his declining health and fortune. Drew scooped up their squealing daughter and carried her toward the porch. "This little lady claims she's too tired to help feed the chickens, but somehow has enough energy to run circles around her poor father. Papa's slow," Sarah declared with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Is that so?" Drew tickled her until she dissolved into giggles. Maybe Papa should throw you in the horse trough to cool off. Drew, Cassidy admonished with mock severity. Don't you dare get her dress wet. We're going into town for supplies later. He set Sarah down with a final kiss to her forehead. Go wash up for breakfast, princess. Mama made biscuits. As their daughter scampered inside, Drew sat beside Cassidy, his arms slipping naturally around her shoulders. How's the little man this morning? Growing stronger every day, Cassidy replied, smiling down at their sleeping son. Just like his father. Drew's fingers gently traced the curve of the baby's cheek. He has your eyes, though. Best thing I ever did was get those eyes to look at me with love. Cassidy leaned into her husband's embrace, remembering the frightened young woman who had tumbled from a broken wagon into a raging river 5 years before. Best thing I ever did was trust a cowboy who promised I was safe. Drew's kiss was as tender as the first they had shared, yet deepened by years of love and shared experiences. You are safe, he whispered against her lips. Always. As the Arizona sun climbed higher in the endless blue sky, the O'Malleys sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built, a life that had begun with a broken axle, a dangerous river crossing, and 6 simple words that had changed everything. You're safe. You're safe now.